workshopped a bunch of different openings for this video, but I feel like you get it, right? You read the title, it makes sense. The method to my madness will be revealed throughout, but as a bit of a spoiler, it is equal parts cold hard science and pure vibes. The first boss we encounter is the Asylum Demon. With a pretty standard moveset and no real special attributes or elemental shenanigans, I think our options are relatively limited. The lore on him is pretty light, and he stands out far more for how he exists in the game and what he represents and teaches the player, as opposed to other bosses who have sick-ass fire breath or who are possessed by the concept of evil. I think we're going to start off strong with the unique and powerful normal typing. There were some other typings that got slight consideration, namely fighting and flying, and very fittingly these two type potentials allow me to explain how my brain was working while deciding these types. Just like in the real Dark Souls 1, the Asylum Demon is going to teach you how this shit works right off the bat. For flying, yeah, he has wings and yeah, he floats, but it doesn't really factor into the fight much. The fact that he flies isn't a key component of his moveset or design, it's more just a thing he can do. This will be somewhat of a constant throughout this video. Just because a boss can use, say, an elemental attack doesn't make them that type. Think of that as their coverage move. This video is already a bit off its rocker. We'll be merging both Pokemon and Souls logic into this video. Again, that will make more sense as we progress. For fighting, yeah, he fights you, but are you seeing the problem already? They all do. If we use this logic, then only Maiden Estrella would be considered not a fighting type in this entire franchise. This isn't to say some bosses won't have more fighting-y components to them, a few come to mind already. So for the Asylum Demon, we're going to stick to the basics and give him the normal typing. Next we have the Tauros Demon, and yeah, although he gives me more fighting-y vibes, I think I'd be betraying everything I just said earlier if I gave him that typing. I think we gotta go with normal again here. He even represents a real-life animal quite a bit, which is something Game Freak likes to reward with the normal typing, which is fair. I'm sorry, I promise this video will get more interesting. Though that's not to say the normal typing is inherently uninteresting, but yeah, you understand. Bell Gargoyles. Now here's a spicy one. Are they made of stone or steel? I did the research, don't rack your brain. It's stone, for they are statues. There's one of our types. By the board, a heavy percentage of rock types are made of rock, and I can't think of any that are confirmed to be made of rock that aren't the rock type, so this one's easy. With several other notable features, this bastard's definitely getting a dual type, like the vast majority of the other bosses we'll cover. They fly, they breathe fire, they're wearing armor, even if that armor is made of rock, it looks like steel, and they're reptilian like a dragon. I thought about all four of these types, but alas, we can only go with one. Flying is sadly out, partly for the same reasons as the Asylum Demon, but there's more this time. In Pokemon, flying is one of the first types to be omitted in favor of other equally prominent qualities. Even in Pokemon with large wings, they can clearly fly and could easily have the flying typing. I'm using this same logic with the Bell Gargoyles. If it didn't have these other features, I'd be very content giving it the rock flying type, but for now we'll stick with rock and what else? The steel armor thing was stupid, I didn't really consider that. Again, maybe if I was dying to give it a dual type, but I'm swimming in options. Although the fire type also wasn't really in contention, despite its flame-filled breath. Plenty of Pokemon learn Flamethrower without having anything to do with the fire typing. Salamence, Garchomp, Togepi, particularly with reptilian Pokemon, it's quite common for them, and if you're searching for a hint towards our Bell Gargoyle's second typing, then I just gave it to you. We're giving these guys the dragon typing. Bell Gargoyles, Dragon, Rock. Pokemon loves giving vaguely draconic Pokemon the dragon type, something I for one am a big fan of. Even Lance agrees. Keeps things a bit more interesting. Next is yet another demon, this time of the Capra variety, but he gets a more unique typing than his former brethren. For starters, the area leading up to him and his entire arena is covered in grass. Not the best justification in the entire world, but I still think it fits him nicely, and it's not a type we're going to be able to throw around too often. He rules this area, and where most bosses who reign over their city or castle-like domain opt for the stone aesthetic, Capra felt inclined to maintain the nature. You know what? That's more than good enough for me. Next we've got fighting. Let me explain. I'm only being a slight hypocrite. I think, much like the other demon bosses, he does have a fighting vibe to him. But something about the speed with which he swings his massive weapons, combined with his ferocious and infuriating dogs, just says fighting to me. A neat piece of lore for the Capra Demon is that he acts as something of a mob boss in this area, controlling the nearby bandits, which is why they attack you. Again, mob boss? That has fighting energy associated with it. Capra Demon is grass fighting. I personally like this typing, I think it fits him nicely. Next is a boss with an abundance of options, the Moonlight Butterfly. One of the only wholly beautiful things we get in the entirety of Dark Souls 1, sadly we still gotta chop its head off. And even sadder still is that this is not the last of our sadly we gotta chop its head off type bosses. But regardless, a few types jumped out to me immediately. Flying, Bug, Psychic, and Fairy. Grass, it's found in a forest, yeah, but it's just got so much else going for it, so not quite. Flying for me is a no-brainer. I've disqualified a few bosses from gaining the flying typing so far since the flying element isn't incorporated into the fight enough for my liking. But here, it's the defining feature. This boss flies far more often than it doesn't, and you have to play the whole fight around that fact. Flying for sure, but for its secondary typing, we've got some things to consider. It breaks my heart, but I've decided against the Bug type. Flying is simply far too prominent to ignore, and I think one other typing is as well, that being Fairy. Psychic was mentioned earlier due to the Moonlight Butterfly's projectile attacks, but honestly at this point Fairy can be associated with those kinds of bright colored projectiles almost just as well. Psychic does signify that power over elements, energy blasts and all that, but it also often denotes intelligence, and the butterfly's beauty is far more prominent than its intelligence. In fact, given the context, I could argue its beauty is a more definitive trait for it than even its flying, demanding it to be given the Fairy type. As I slightly alluded to earlier, Dark Souls 1 is a dark, sad game set in a grim, hopeless world. I genuinely cannot think of another example of a purely pretty creature existing in a purely pretty location. There's immense beauty to be found often throughout this world, but usually in a desolate, hollow kind of way. The Moonlight Butterfly's vibrant color pattern, the kempt, almost regal forest they inhabit. Although it is a creation of Seath and his evil experiments, it stands as one of the very few just pleasant things. It's a boss, we gotta kill it, even though no we don't. It's optional, and this furthers the theme this game sets of making you question why you're actually doing what you're doing. But still, its beauty is something to behold, and it flies quite a lot. This is a flying fairy type, no doubt. Sorry Bug, my beloved. You'll get your chance to shine later, I promise. And your chance to shine is right here, right now. The Gaping Dragon also has many options, from water and poison to the eponymous dragon, but this thing, it's just a bug, man. It's a creepy, crawly little bug. It's also a dragon. It's a bug dragon, just like Fly. Its exposed, gaping ribcage tickles me in that same way reading about the more gruesome, horrific bugs that possess its victims and kill its prey in disgusting ways does. It's got some poison AoEs, so I thought maybe poison, but no. The other one that we really should consider is the water typing. Emerging from the water, suggesting perhaps that it lives there, it has that sleek, scaly exterior reminiscent of crocodiles, and honestly, this thing is quite the water type. It also has wings with a flying attack. This thing has many types you could argue for, but calling it anything other than bug dragon just wouldn't feel right to me. If you think it should be water dragon, or another type for that matter, let me know below. Hell, I highly encourage you to drop your typing for any and all bosses in this game. I'm sure opinions would vary wildly, and I'd love to hear why you think certain bosses deserve certain typings. Plus, comments help the algorithm, and I love being able to discuss this kind of stuff with people. Now who's next? The fan favorite Chaos Witch Quelaag has a very clear typing to me. Fire Bug. Alright, she's an attractive girl, so I can hear people hollering for fairy, but come on. She's on fire, she spews fire, she traverses through fire, and she's half spider. Although spiders aren't bugs, they sure as hell are where Pokémon is concerned. Just because she's fun to look at doesn't make her a fairy, though her devotion to her sister does give her some points towards fairy. But again, what are we doing here? Bug fire is a gimme, and look at that comparable. That's amazing. Great boss, great Pokémon, no notes. Stray Demon's just normal again. I don't know, man. It's the same as the Asylum Demon. It flies a bit, but no more than its predecessor. It's got that AoE, but it's more just an energy blast that happens to be orange. I don't think it's reminiscent of fire. Don't worry, we'll have a fire demon soon enough. Stray Demon's normal. After traversing through Sen's fortress of funhouse mirrors, scythe pendulums, and bowling balls Clifford the Big Red Dog would use, we get the Iron Golem. Steel, right? Pokemon should have made the steel type just the metal type, but they use steel to mean the same thing. This behemoth is steel. I don't really think anything else fits. It's got that cool mechanic of being able to be staggered to the point of it falling off the bridge to its death, but that doesn't really lend itself to any certain typings. This bad boy is just pure steel. Cool and rare typing, honestly. Once heading deeper into the stunning Anor Londo, a lot of players will be sucked into the painted world of Ariamis, home of crossbreed Priscilla. Remember what I mentioned regarding the Moonlight Butterfly, making you question why you're doing what you're doing? Well, Priscilla kicks it up a notch, literally telling you she doesn't want to fight and telling you how to leave safely. She looks and sounds kind. She really isn't someone you need to fight, and yet, you probably still did. She's got a boss health bar. She's an official Dark Souls 1 boss. My hands are tied, I told myself when I first encountered her. There are a few here to wrestle with, namely Dragon, Ice, Fairy, and something like Psychic Ghost. Ice is kinda obvious, but at the same time it's maybe unnecessary. She has the white hair, and her domain is snow and ice, but lots of non-ice types live in snowy regions, like Garchomp, Machamp, and Gardevoir. Gardevoir is a good comparison here, functioning as an elegant, regal female character as well. She does utilize the snow and ice in her moveset, so it's definitely still an option. The Ghost Psychic aspect largely relates to her invisibility powers, which I think could work for either type. She also shines in an ethereal, otherworldly way when you first encounter her, which gives me Ghosty Ghost vibes. But her title, Crossbreed, relates to her father Seath the Scaleless, a cruel and evil dragon. Her mother was a human woman. Priscilla was sealed away in this world, feared and reviled by the gods of Anor Londo. In time, she came to think of her fellow Ariamis inhabitants as people she had to protect and care for. She pitied them, seeing herself in them. She's non-hostile at first, she wants you to leave safely so she can continue protecting her domain. Add to this her life hunt ability, relevant because fairies are often associated with healing, and that certainly narrows our options down to 3. She is part dragon, and although not all dragons are dragon type, I still really like it for her. Now, is she more fairy, or is she more ice? I think ice fits her a bit more. Not all kind Pokemon are fairy, but the amount of snow and ice in her design and moveset I think have forced my hand here. Crossbreed Priscilla is a dragon ice type. Like many Pokemon, she fits 3 types extremely well. Now we have the infamous duo of Anor Londo, a massive skill check in the exact point where this game goes from polished and nearly perfect to a lot more hit and miss. Should we give them one typing or two? I think they each deserve their own. For a shared type, I suppose Steel is a must. They are fully clad in armor. Ornstein's second type is electric, definitely. He slayed dragons, but that doesn't make him one. Was Gen 4 Weavile a dragon type? Nuh-uh, just a Cynthia's Garchomp counter. So for Dragon Slayer Ornstein, we've got the Steel electric typing. Very cool. For our Resident Executioner, considering we don't have the Cannibal type, let's give this monster our first Dark typing. Yeah, plenty of the bosses in this game are evil, and now that I think about it, Dark could have actually worked well for our many normal type demons, but Executioner Smough is on another level. Acting as the Executioner of Anor Londo, he would grind the bones of his victims into dust and consume them, and he was rejected from becoming one of Gwyn's knights due to his sadistic nature. This big boy gets the Steel Dark typing. And finally in Anor Londo is Gwyndolin, whose typing seems shoved right in our faces. Dark Fairy. His title is Dark Sun, although not dark in the evil sense like Smough, or fairy in the kind protective way like Priscilla. Just look at this guy. Pokemon logic sometimes goes deep to establish typings, but sometimes it really is just vibes and aesthetic based. And actually, if you dig a bit deeper into the lore, the typing starts to suit him extremely well. Born a male, he was raised a female so as not to anoint him an official heir to Gwyn's throne. He grew up to be a powerful sorcerer, specializing in moon magic while interestingly holding a deep admiration for his father. His lore goes pretty deep, but even just his title and appearance suggests Dark Fairy, and so that he shall remain. Now going into our 4 Lord Souls and the accompanying bosses they are locked behind, let's start with everyone's favorite loyal pupper, Great Grey Wolf Sif. Is there a sad type? With some of the best, most tragic lore in the entire franchise, Sif really is just pure normal in the best of ways. She uses a steel sword, and yeah, I guess that's good enough for Zacian, and she is protective and loyal in a fairy-esque way, which is Zacian's typing? Am I gonna give this good girl Fairy Steel just because a popular Pokemon dog has that typing? Sif really is just a wolf though. A dog with no real steel aside from the sword she wields. Like with fighting not being a part of every boss who fights you, steel would also suit most due to the weapons certain bosses wield. I don't think her sword is enough, but her loyalty and devotion to Artorias might be enough for the Fairy type. This one's hard. I was pretty set on the normal type, but now, I don't know. Giving her pure fairy seems silly when Zacian and his fairy steel typing exist, but I think that line of thinking is antithetical to the true nature of this video. She's just a big, beautiful wolf. Normal fairy? Yeah, I think I like that. Pokemon uses this logic when an otherwise very normal Pokemon, typically one that resembles a real-world creature, has just a tiny smidge of something else, but not so much that it overpowers the normal entirely. Although they've never given us a normal fairy, they usually use this logic for the more elemental types. Let's pretend this good doggo has like Steelworker as an ability, so she gets Steel Stab and we'll use Zacian as our comparable. Defeating this loyal beast is just as mentally difficult as deciding her typing. Fitting. Defeating Sif gives us the Covenant of Artorias Ring that allows us to traverse the Abyss and fight the 4 kings. Living in the pure darkness of the evil Abyss, Dark is a gimme. They're in steel armor, but they're also sorta undead, but not really? The lore seems fuzzy. They were essentially sealed away after becoming corrupted by the Abyss. They have life drain powers, they seem a bit ghosty, and I scoured the web for the wording they were humans, but it always says are. I don't think I can give these creepy bitches the typing of ghost in good conscience. They've got the purple AoEs, a color associated with both psychic and ghost, and poison, but I don't really think that's enough. I think they're classic Dark Steel, lumping them in with Smough, which I think is actually quite nice. Venturing into the Duke's archives now, we get the deplorable Seath the Scaleless. Allowed to conduct experiments on humans and other creatures by Gwyn himself, Seath is a pretty disgusting monster who also happens to be as icy and as draconic as basically possible. Let's not overthink this one. He is dark and evil as shit, but dark only sometimes relates to a Pokemon's nature. Although the franchise typically strays away from anointing any one breed of Pokemon as evil, some that might fit that description are Giratina, banished to the Distortion World to create balance and due to its aggressive and malevolent nature. Not Dark type. Drifloon, said to whisk children away to the afterlife. Not Dark type. Bayonet, created by hateful energy as it was once a possessed nightmare discarded by a former trainer. Not Dark type. I could go on, and even some Dark types like Darkrai or Absol that are thought to be evil really aren't. Although Dark can be the evil type, as it quite literally is in Japanese, Pokemon picks and chooses when to use that as gospel. Seath is an ice dragon, just like his daughter. Moving on. We find ourselves in the Catacombs, and I'd have a lot harder of a time arguing these guys aren't befitting of the Dark type. Starting with Pinwheel. Oh, poor, sad Pinwheel. Dark type for him for sure, but I'm also going to give him the Ghost typing as he's an accomplished necromancer and the somewhat ruler of the many undead skeletons within the catacombs. He's also an amalgamation of 3 people, the father, the mother, and the child, which is also quite dark and ghosty. This type suits him. For Nido, sadly, the exact same typing suits him perfectly. And I only say sadly because it's a tad boring, but this dude is literally known as Gravelord, and he himself died but used the immense power of his Lord Soul to bring himself back to life using necromancy. He then aided Gwyn in his war against the dragons before returning to his underground necropolis, becoming essentially the Lord of Death and Darkness. Gravelord Nito gets the Ghost Dark typing as well. Finally, we head off to the Demon Ruins and Lost Izalith for what promises to be a slew of fire types. Ceaseless Discharge? Fire type. Anything else? I don't think so. The thing with his dead sister's clothes, the massive cheese you can do to kill him instantly, nothing notable about him has anything to do with Pokemon types aside from him existing in and being entirely on fire. Ceaseless gets the pure fire typing. Demon Fire Sage? Oh, you mean Asylum Demon Part 3? Well, he's on fire, so he's got the fire typing. But let's also throw him the normal typing. And where we gave it to Sif in the nicest way possible, we're giving it to this guy in the most derogatory, pejorative way imaginable. Why does this guy even exist? Same theme as the Asylum Demon, there's barely anything between him and the next boss, who at the very least is new and unique. In a boss-bloated, unfinished area, this guy has absolutely no business existing. Fire and a disrespectful normal. Centipede Demon. Why do I think of myself as always liking this guy? He's not really fun to fight, but I don't know, I just like his design. Fire Bug, as easy as it gets. It's an on-fire centipede. Ah, the Bed of Chaos, the rage and sorrow you have induced. Fire Grass? This seems good, yeah? Dark type for how evil the design and mechanics are, maybe? Nah, I'm just kidding. It's a tree with a bunch of fire. It literally has two prevalent themes. Although, you could argue trees relate more to the ground typing. Now this made a lot of sense in my head, but once I dug a bit deeper, it wasn't really supported all that much. Examples include Phantom, Trevenant, Shiftry, Arboliva. I think I want to go with Grass. Our most direct comparable would be the Trevenant line, with Torterra also fulfilling that role, but only dividing us farther due to it being both these types. Grass is living, ground is not, trees are living, the Bed of Chaos gets the Fire Grass typing. Now moving into the DLC. The quality and difficulty of these bosses goes up several notches, so let's hope we can assign them interesting and fitting enough types to do them justice. Starting with the vastly underrated Sanctuary Guardian. It gets the flying typing for sure, representing both sides of this coin actually, that being actual flying and wind. Flying is a pretty large part of its moveset, using it to reposition, attack, and escape. The wind attack is just when it flaps its wings at you, hurling what seems to be both water and wind, but the water is on the ground beneath us, it's not summoning it or influencing it by any means, so flying for sure. Its other primary form of damage in this fight is its many lightning blasts, and seeing as though it's so common in its attacking arsenal and it doesn't have another type begging to be chosen, I think electric suits it perfectly. This boss also establishes the tone of the DLC as being much faster and more aggressive, and the electric type is often associated with speed. Our Sanctuary Guardian gets the electric flying typing. Oh, and the rematch against two of them is just it spamming double team. Knight Artorias. I really like the poison typing for the swelling purple when he buffs and attacks, but it's really more the shading on the oozing abyss more so than actual poison. That, combined with his now evil nature, being tragically corrupted by the abyss itself, means the dark type suits him perfectly. Grass also is kinda worth considering for his surrounding terrain, but there's really no grass in his design or moveset at all. We're dancing around the obvious one, that being Steel. I loved this typing when I first came up with this video idea, as he was one of the very first I typed, but since giving it to the Four Kings and Smough, I was secretly hoping for a more unique typing to force my hand. But no, the Dark Steel typing suits this tragic knight perfectly. After being sniped from the sky by Goff, we face off against Black Dragon Calamite. Is his type right there in the name? Dark Dragon? Maybe. Dragon for sure, no way around that one. I originally thought this would be a great chance to use the cool Dragon Electric typing, but what I was remembering as electric elements turned out to just be the yellow aura around his black energy blasts. This makes me lean towards Dark again, but I still think I prefer flying for him. Not only does he fly into the air to unleash his black-yellow fire blasts, but your first encounter with the dragon involves him flying up to you, landing on the bridge before you, then zooming away, flapping his massive wings. Plus, obviously, Goff has to snipe him out of the air so he can even be fought, making flying a huge element of this boss, and if we weren't able to pick him out of the sky, he likely would have incorporated even more flying into his actual fight. It's not often that we can consider elements from outside the boss battle, seeing as though we rarely encounter bosses anywhere aside from in their arena, but it's nice that we can incorporate that uniqueness into our typing. I was really tempted to use Dark. His name contains black, his midnight coloration, his dark energy blasts, but dark energy blasts like Dark Pulse are common coverage moves, and there are plenty of black Pokemon who don't have the dark typing, Luxray being a famous example. And there's nothing inherently evil about Calamite. Dark suits him really well, but I'm happy with his official typing being Dragon Flying. Last in the DLC is the Father of the Abyss, Manus. Another very tiny reason I was inclined to forego the dark typing for Calamite was that we were going to use it before and after him. Don't worry, that would never make or break my decision. This video is about objective science first and foremost. But still, the Father of the Abyss is getting the dark typing. He literally created the Abyss and corrupted a plethora of people and all of Ulasile in the process. He possessed the Dark Soul. His second typing is a bit more unique though, one we haven't given out yet, Psychic. Although he uses his wooden catalyst as a blunt weapon, he uses it just as often to summon immensely powerful magic attacks. Even as a primordial human, he was also a sorcerer. The Dark Psychic typing suits him wonderfully, and it's also a fun coincidence this happens to be a unique typing amongst our Dark Souls 1 bosses. We end with Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, and despite being our very final boss, he actually evokes a unique question regarding whether or not a boss's typing should be exclusive to how they are when we fight them, or who they were before we fought them, / who they are in a lore sense. I guess Calamite also kinda did this with his flying before we actually fought him, but for Gwyn I'm talking about way in the past. This namely regards his famous Sunlight Spear attack, which is kind of a hybrid of light, electricity, fire, and aesthetic, but deals lightning damage, which I think would more than qualify him for electric typing status alongside his more obvious fire typing, that being the element encasing his weapon and representing the first flame he sacrificed himself to Link. However, he doesn't use the Sunlight Spear against you, likely due to this Gwyn being the sad husk of the former lord after he spent eons burning in the first flame. So should we consider who he was, or just who he is? I'd prefer to lean towards who Gwyn was and what he represented, and I'm fully leaning that way due to the fact that the Gwyn we actually fight is still effectively immune to lightning damage, farthering the notion that our old Lord of Cinder is still very much in there somewhere. This is a very case-by-case thing, considering we didn't consider this school of thought for someone like Artorias, who of course at one point had absolutely no dark within him. This is a bit of a gray area, which is exactly how we love to end our videos. With all that being said, our Lord of Cinder will be receiving the typing of Electric Fire. This dumb video was a massive blast to make. Massive shout out to my buddy Lyle, a streamer over on Twitch, who helped come up with these typings and the rationale behind them. Go give him a watch, he goes by the name Grinval. If you like this idea, please for the love of Gwyn comment down below, as I'd love to continue this series with the other games. Subscribe if you like this kind of stuff and want to support my growing channel, and take care. Until next time.